It's your friends, Kelly and Bobby, and we're back on Time for Forgiveness. And if you're one of our continued visitors, we welcome you back. It's great to have you here in our family. And if you're new to the Time for Forgiveness show, welcome. Again, we love that you're here, and we welcome you to the community because you're going to be really blessed today. I know Kelly and I already are. Our guest today is the amazing Carrie Sheffield. And Carrie, before we bring you in, I'm just going to give you a quick welcome here. Carrie is a columnist and a broadcaster in Washington, D.C. She earned a full tuition Harvard scholarship, managed billions on Wall Street, and today she achieved all of that while overcoming a life of extreme poverty, psychological, spiritual, and sexual abuse. Today, Carrie is passionate about instilling resilience and joy in others. So again, Carrie Sheffield, welcome to the Time for Forgiveness show. We are so excited that you're here with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Well, as we get started talking about your story and your book, which is Motorhome Prophecies, I just want to open because when I was reading the book, it started with, this book is about tearing down false fronts. And I think so many people can relate to that, including myself, of perfectionism, healing from the inside out, coming to peace with God and forgiving others. But my prayer in writing my story is to help stop passing trauma to future generations. And I promise you, as you're listening to this episode it has the power to change your life. And I just want to ask, Carrie, if you'd be kind enough just to open with a framework of just kind of your upbringing, because I think if we take our audience there, it is even going to allow them to experience, part of the book as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. And thank you, Bobby. Thank you both for having me and for your incredible work. I do believe with forgiveness, it's how we live out our Christian faith and how we heal the world. And so I'm so grateful for what you all are doing with your ministry. And so just to give a quick synopsis of my story, as you mentioned, the book is called Motorhome Prophecies, A Journey of Healing and Forgiveness. And it's called Motorhome Prophecies because I have 7 biological siblings, and with our mother and father, all 10 of us crammed into a motorhome, we also lived in sheds and tents and also in houses. The only constant throughout my childhood was chaos. I went to 17 public schools and homeschool by the time I graduated from high school. When I was in my senior year, I was living in a shed in the Ozarks with no running water and no furnace, and just dealing with my brother sexually abusing me, and that brother was schizophrenic. And so it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare to have a father who put a curse on me in the name of Jesus if I left basically his own homegrown cult. It's called Motorhome Prophecies because we lived in the motorhome, but also because he claimed to be a Mormon prophet. And I'm very careful when I let people know about what happened. His behavior was not sanctioned by the official, it's commonly called the Mormon Church, but it's officially the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That church, the LDS Church, the big one headquartered in Salt Lake, they eventually excommunicated my father. And so he was an extremist. It was not mainstream. And so I want people to know that. But his belief that he was a prophet, that he was chosen, that someday he would become president of the United States, that really undergirded his behavior in terms of his grandiosity and also his belief that he could do no wrong and that whatever he said was God's will.
Wow.
Yeah. As I was reading the pages, so many emotions came over me, sadness, empathy, sometimes even anger, but it moved to hope because I was so moved and transformed to think of the power of the human spirit with resilience. I think we forget that sometimes. And as I was reading your story, I think what really resonated with me, and it's not just me, and I think it's a problem here in society today, is we have this imposter syndrome. And we've bought the lie, and we put this front, and we try to become perfect in all areas of our life. And, that's something as I was reading your story just how prevalent that is today. And I'd love for you just to kind of talk about, you journey through the experiences growing up, and as you left the home and you started your own life and rebuilding, but you really stayed in a lie, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, basically, so by the time I hit 18, I decided through a discernment process that I believed my father was a false prophet and I wanted to leave. By that point, I was living in a motorhome with 10 people, including a 200-pound man who wanted to rape me, my brother. And I was suffering from just depression, and I was diagnosed with PTSD when I was 19. But when I was 18, I had to make that choice about leaving, and I decided to leave. And my father raised his hand, like making an oath, and he said, I prophesy in the name of Jesus, you'll be raped and murdered if you leave. And the book, as you probably noticed, I have some gallows humor. It was just kind of one of those things. If I stay, I'm going to get raped. If I leave, I'm getting raped.
It's no good either
No
way.
matter what I do, and
Yeah.
but I chose freedom. I chose to leave, and I was disowned. My father said my blood changed, that I was no longer his daughter. I was not allowed home all through college. So I am now 42 years old. I have not spent a night under my parents' roof since I was 18. And my parents said I was satanic. I was the first to leave, even though I have 4 big brothers. And they said because I was satanic, I would corrupt my siblings, and so I was not allowed home. And I would say the result of that, well, not only my own personal results, and I don't get, as I mentioned in my author's note, I don't delve deeply into my siblings' lives because it's their own lives to tell and their own stories. But just so folks know, 4 of my siblings have attempted suicide, and I was suicidal. And 2 of my brothers now have schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is probably the most severe mental illness known to mankind. And they were both healthy boys and both strong in their academics. One of the brothers had immense gifting in music and showed no signs of schizophrenia. And there's a lot of evidence that says that schizophrenia is tied to child abuse. And so the fruits of all of this abuse has been destruction. As the Bible says, the evil one comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so my coping mechanism with that childhood was that I developed what I now call, and I've heard different pastors talk about this, orphan syndrome, or the orphan heart, as opposed to sonship or daughtership heart. And that's basically what you touched on, Kelly. That is the imposter syndrome, is the orphan heart, which is the heart of insecurity, the heart of putting your validation in external appearance, putting your validation in what others think of you, your self-worth, and how much money you make, in anything that is not God and rooted in God's knowledge, or the knowledge of God's view of us as his children, which is the sonship or the daughtership approach. And when we're rooted in son and daughtership, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I've seen orphan heart for people, even if they have a father and mother in their life. But if those parents haven't instilled in them the knowledge of their true parent and given them a healthy understanding and love of themselves, then they're going to keep operating as they did for many years with that orphan heart. And the sonship and the daughtership heart is one that is rooted in self-worth, but also rooted in humility and rooted in that balance of knowing that I have confidence, but it's a humble confidence because I am both, I am worthy, but I am also humble. And so it's a place of being secure and knowing that my self-worth is coming from God, not from anything here on earth.
So, Carrie, just coming out of that level of dysfunction and abuse, and you're like 20 years old, I mean, for most, they're not going to, over the last 22 years, where you were and where you are today is really astounding. Like, the level of success, everything you've been able to accomplish. What happened in your life? I know you touched on a little bit, but I want to have you share it with the audience. Like, what took you from that low of lows to where you are today? When you talk about like the self-awareness and the ability to love yourself and those types of things, that you have to feel it not only in your conscious mind but in your subconscious. How did that happen? It just didn't happen by random choice. How did you go from that? I guess I just want people to understand that, that people that are struggling in similar situations, there's so many people that are. How would you advise them? What do they need to do?
Yeah, Bobby, you nailed it on the head about the subconscious. And I think this isn't well understood. And I'm speaking from experience as someone who's now been a baptized Christian for 7 years. I don't believe within the Christian community we understand or respect the subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And what that basically means is in the Bible where it says, why do I do things that I don't want to do? That there's a verse in the New Testament about that. Well, that's your subconscious.
Yeah.
And the way that the subconscious, the human mind is created and formed, it's really the neuroplasticity of children from ages 0 to 8. That is when it is basically, like computer coding.
Mm-hmm.
The human mind is basically coded from ages 0 to 8. And unless a child receives healthy coding, it becomes imprinted with a coding
It's
that
like a
is
virus code is how we refer to it. There's a virus code that's ruined the program, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a virus code. And so much we see in the Bible and just in the world, uh, unless that virus code is taken out, we get generational curses.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the case of my father and mother, my mother, for example, her father beat her sister, my aunt, and my grandmother didn't stop that. My grandfather also was a serial cheater on my grandmother, and my grandmother stayed with him and didn't do anything about it. And then with my father, he was sexually molested by a babysitter, and his parents, and my father was born in 1938. I don't think they understood how impactful that was. There's a lot of evidence that says children who are sexually abused are multiple times more likely to kill themselves as adults. And that is part of why my father became, I believe, so traumatized, as he said as an adult that that assault made him feel suicidal as an adult. And so he passed that abuse. My mother passed that abuse into the imprinting, that virus abuse into my siblings and I. And so that's why we saw the self-destructive behavior in us and in myself. And so to answer your question, how did I get out of this coding? I would say it was two major things for me, and it's been a journey. It didn't happen overnight because initially I was in denial about it. I think because I was high achieving, managing billions of dollars in credit at Wall Street firms, getting a full scholarship to Harvard, going on national television shows, debating policy. I was highly functional in my career, but I was ignoring the virus imprint. And so in my private life, I kept dating a string of men who were cheating on me, verbally abusing me. One was a drug addict, one was abusing alcohol. And it just kept happening, and it was so normalized, that behavior, even though it wasn't what I wanted. So it was like that Bible verse, why do I keep dating these men even though it's not what I want? Because in my subconscious, it's what I believed I deserved. And so the subconscious rewiring for me, the first piece of it was to become a Christian. I spent about 12 years agnostic. The book gets into detail about my conversion and how that happened. But through that process of healing, I went through what's sometimes called deliverance ministry or deep healing prayer ministry. And in that process, you have prayer ministers who are able to pray through specific traumas. I went through a program where, in order to be accepted, we had to fill out, as I said, it's more invasive than a doctor's office. It was like a 10-page intake form where we had to write down our grandparents' traumas and sins, our parents' traumas and sins, and then our own traumas and sins, and take responsibility for them. Mm-hmm. And then we prayed through them. And we brought in Jesus into those memories, and we brought in Emmanuel to say, God with us. Where was Jesus in these moments? Where was Jesus in that moment of my brother attacking me? Where was Jesus in that moment when my head was gashed and my father didn't want to take me to the ER because we had no money, and he was going to have to use the Christmas money and take it from my siblings to pay for my medical care, and I said no, so he sewed my head up by hand.
Wow.
Where was Jesus in that, you know?
Right.
And in the book, you had said at times you would think that if Jesus allowed this, he had to be an asshole. So where was he in those moments?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, Jesus even said in the Bible, he's very harsh about people who abuse children. He said anyone who's abused a child deserves to have a millstone wrapped around their neck and they should be thrown into the sea. So Jesus is not gray at all when it comes to child abuse. And yet he allows it. And so that's part of why I was agnostic for 12 years, because I said, well, either there is no God, or if there is a God, he hates me and I hate him back. And so I think what I've come to realize now is that the way he has set up our earth, not just for child abuse, but cancer or in any number of horrible sufferings, he allows for pain. This doesn't mean that he wants it. It just means that he allows it in this time and place. But I do believe that the eternity is so much longer than this finite mortal existence that we have, and that everything will be restored, and that every pain and sorrow will be made right.
Well,
And that's
I
where
want to
faith
echo
comes
that.
in.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Carrie, because it he uses it for our good if we look for the good or we accept the good that can come from it. And I know we went through that in our journey with our story, coming out of the wake of that tragedy, trying to find that was the thing that we wrestle with for so long is what's the meaning that we're going to attach to this
Well,
thing?
I think I wrestled, and I'm so glad you said that and that everyone can hear that, because I wrestled with why would you allow this? And I had to come to a space that he doesn't promise that we won't experience any of that while we're here, but he will use it for his good, as long as we're open. But I really was at a place also that I was angry and I really challenged him. And I think he's okay that we question and that we're curious. But, it's brought me great hope, understanding that, like you said, nothing is wasted.
But I'm so glad that you touched on it in detail, Carrie, the subconscious, because this is an area that, like our listeners, if you're not familiar with your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, you should really spend some time looking into that, because the subconscious is controlling all of our habitual behavior. And so if we're not aware of why, it's that idea that I need to start thinking about what I'm thinking about. And when you start becoming more consciously aware of what that little wheel in your mind that's spinning over and over again is talking to you all day long, this is what's really controlling everything. So it's not the external. We get so caught up in our senses. We think the senses are telling us everything that's happening, but it's all an inside game. And so we have to learn to work from the inside out. It sounded that you became aware of that, Carrie, and then you started going to work on yourself. And that's when things started to change.
Well, exactly. Yes. And that's what I said earlier, the kind of the two major turning points for me in my journey of healing was becoming a Christian. But then secondly, I completed a program called the Atlas Project. And I actually finished it after the book came out, so I didn't have time to put it in, unfortunately. But it has been so transformative. They have it in Austin, Texas, and in Las Vegas. Folks who have gone through that, some of them have done other programs they say are similar, like Hoffman or Landmark, if people are familiar with these programs. But in any case, it's very much in person. It needs to be done in person. And basically going through it, it's about a 4-month process. I flew to Texas 4 times. Actually 5 times, 4 times. Anyway, multiple times. I flew thousands of miles from where I live. I'd have to add them all up. But in any case, it was worth that sacrifice. I made professional sacrifices to go because I learned so much about my subconscious. I learned how the negative thoughts, we are quite often, because it is subconscious and it's been coded, we think that we are passive victims of our own thoughts, when in actuality, we have the power to control our thoughts. And so through this training that I went through, I began to really question my thoughts about the world. And I realized how much I was still living in a victim story. And I think that people, and since your show is about forgiveness, those of us who have been severely wronged, it's so easy to live in a victim story.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, that actually gives a lot of power to the perpetrator. And so the subconscious victim story is death to your future. The subconscious victim story is death to victory. And once I became aware of my victim story and how much I had allowed it to essentially recreate the trauma in my life. And that's why I said the book at the beginning is a book about self-sabotage and overcoming sabotage. First, the sabotage of my parents, and then my own sabotage. And there's a song I want to write about generational trauma and self-sabotage, which is basing it on the verse where Jesus says, "Who among you, if your son were to ask for bread, you would give him a stone? If he asked for fish, you would give him a serpent? If you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give you good gifts?" Well, quite often for people like myself, my father gave me lots of stones and lots of serpents. And so that verse meant nothing to me. And it was hard for me to conceive of a heavenly father who would want good for me. But so the song would basically say, the first verse is, "My father gave me stones, my father gave me serpents." I went out to the serpent store and the stone store and bought a lot more myself, baskets full. And then the third verse is, Jesus taught me how to drop the stones, drop the serpents, and he gave me the bread of life. And he gave me fish to eat and sustenance and life. And that's what overcoming trauma is. And that's what forgiveness helps us through that process. Because if we don't break the trauma in our minds, we recreate it. And that's why quite often you see the child of an alcoholic become an alcoholic. You see the child,
Mhm.
who has an abused mother, she marries an abusive man who then abuses her. And so the forgiveness process is part of the healing from trauma process.
Yeah,
You can't do it
100%. The
without it.
Well, another great example is welfare. That 78% of children that grow up in homes that their parents are on welfare, they end up on welfare. So it's repeated behavior. You're exactly right, but it's conditioned at an early age. But I know you wanted to ask a question, Hank.
Well, I think throughout the book you had talked about how you were really almost conditioned to perform or to prove instead of really to express yourself. And it seems like you're in a space of really expressing yourself. But there was a sentence that you put in the book that I underlined and put wow and exclamation marks. And you said, at age 39, I finally resolved to see myself as a blessed person and shut out the noise. And I think you had also mentioned when you had moved from the feeling of being the victim, that you really started to move into a space of really going to gratitude. And so there was a example in the book that, and I think I wrote it down, that it was like for a year, was it a yearly calendar that you did this day? Could you tell the audience? Because I really hope, this isn't really just entertainment, that we're here helping solve problems. And it's about maybe starting a new conversation or relationship with forgiveness. And we want to give them actionable tools. And that really caught my attention. Like, I want to do that this year.
Yeah, so I called it my master's degree in happiness. And coming from Wall Street, I love spreadsheets. So uh, anyone can learn to love the spreadsheet. But for me, I did it inside of Google Documents because it's easy to have it in the cloud, because I could do it on my laptop or on my phone or wherever I was, and log in remotely. But so basically what I did is I had, the date on the left side column, and then I had different verticals where I was being conscious of taking action for myself, for my body, my mind, my spirit. And then I was uh, expressing an act of service to someone. And then I was offering gratitude for something. And so I went through that, it sounds like a lot, but usually I'd put like even just one sentence or even just 2 words or 1 word sometimes, went to the gym, or, I planked today for my body, I did some planking or whatever. And it became a really good accountability tool for me. And some days it was just like, I did nothing today, and but it was just being mindful of I did nothing today. Um, to know how I was treating myself. But to both have also a template to do something for somebody else, that's a great way to get out of self-sabotage. It's a great way to get out of victim, is to do something for someone else. And then the gratitude, as you mentioned, it's just nice to pause and reflect on something that I'm grateful for, and to know I am a blessed person, as I said in the book, that I recently was reminded of the story of Job, where, Satan said that Job only loves God because he's got a great life. And so take it all away and see what happens. And and it turns out he still loved God. And so I think that is when we are stuck in these moments of pain and abuse, or whatever we need to forgive. Again, it's not about, this is an important distinction that I talk about in the book. I have a whole chapter on forgiveness in the book. But the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And it's really, I think, an important distinction, because one is about our own power and the other is about respecting the free will of others. So forgiveness is something we do. It's a single party endeavor. It is our choice. We forgive the abuser, and sometimes the abuser's ourselves. And then the reconciliation is a two-party endeavor that is contingent. It's a contingent situation that is dependent on the behavior of someone else, and I cannot control that. And when people are going through AA, for example, they often will quote the Serenity Prayer, which is, God, grant me the strength to know the difference between the things I can control and the things I can't control, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's how I think about forgiveness. Forgiveness is something I can control. Reconciliation is something I cannot control. And the wisdom is to know that difference.
And I think that distinction is so important, because I think people say, I've tried it, it didn't work, because they have an expectation on the reconciliation. And you're never going to be able to control the response. So I love that we went there, because I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah, and when we talk about learned behavior, I mean, forgiveness, that's a learned behavior too. It's a skill that we either acquire, I think, because we see our parents or our loved ones, the community we grow up in, offering forgiveness or saying you're sorry. Carrie, I grew up in an Italian-American family, and those words just weren't spoken, okay? It just
They
didn't
got
happen.
grudges. You guys do grudges, right? That's your thing. You got
You
grudges.
just
It
cut
was
off the
chop off.
relationship.
Yeah.
But so that's what's interesting to me, is someone's listening like, you don't know my story, there's no way I could forgive. But you literally said, I thought it was impossible to forgive my father, Ralph, for the actions that he had taken amongst myself, my family. So how did you get there?
Well, like I said, I got a whole chapter, so it goes in depth, but real quickly, one force that really helped me was what I like to call now my forgiveness mentor. So maybe that's a tangible item for you. Get a forgiveness mentor in your life, someone who you respect, who you've seen recover. And so for me, my forgiveness mentor is named Anthony Thompson, and he is a pastor in Charleston, South Carolina. And he has a very tragic story. His wife was murdered in Charleston at a church where she was leading a Wednesday night Bible study in the church basement. And it was a historically Black church called Mother Emanuel Church, or Emanuel AME Church. And the person who he shot his wife and 8 other people. So he killed 9 Black parishioners because he was hunting Black people. It was just this heinous act from a white supremacist who had driven across the state from Columbia to hunt Black people. And his goal was to create a race war in Charleston. He had seen, this was in 2015, he had seen race riots in other parts of the country, cities burning, lots of lives lost and property damage in the wake of riots, and race-based riots. And so he was wanting he was wanting to create chaos. I mean, that's what the evil one does: steal, kill, and destroy. And instead, what he created in response was this radical act of forgiveness from family members of the murdered. And it was this miracle that was heard around the world. And Anthony would be a great guest for your show, but he along with others, in the first bond hearing, when the accused was brought up, they forgave him. The judge allowed the family members to forgive him, or to speak to him. And they, one after the other, many of them said, I forgive you. I forgive you. God forgives you. Give your life to Christ. Anthony is a pastor in Charleston also. And he's written a book himself. The title is Called to Forgive. And I poured over that book when I met him. I met him through, I believe, some divine appointments. And uh, he talks about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And for him, he had spent a lifetime growing up in the segregated South. He had experienced a lot of racism. And so he had spent a long time as a young man really angry and full of bitterness and wanting to lash out against the injustices that he had personally experienced. But he said eventually he got to a place where he knew that was not God's plan for his life. And he was able to forgive and release and not allow people in his life to have power over him by not forgiving them. And so it was interesting. I joked with him, by the time his wife was murdered, it was like your forgiveness resume had been built up because you had been creating this forgiveness muscle, if you will, where so he'd been able to forgive smaller sins and smaller acts of aggression, so that when this just unimaginable horror happened, he was able to forgive this person. Again, it's not that he thinks that the killer should be set free. He doesn't. He supports the justice system locking him up and taking him to court. But he has actually visited him in prison and tried to bring Christ to him. And it's a miracle. So he became a friend and mentor, and we talked about what happened with my father. And I was so moved by his story. And I knew that if he could forgive this guy, that I could forgive my dad.
There it is right there.
That is a big idea for anyone and all of us to accept. If you can do it, that means that I could do it. If I'm willing and I'm open to the idea.
Well, I think, and this is what we're on a mission to do, is teach as many people as possible the power and science behind making the decision to forgive, because everything starts with a decision. And Carrie, that's what happened with you. I think you learned the science and power behind it, and how it attached you to your faith in Christ, and then it became easier that way to just go ahead and forgive.
Yeah, and it really is a science. I was invited to be part of a working group around education around forgiveness with an initiative at Harvard called the Harvard Human Flourishing Project. And they have done studies, and they bring together people who study this stuff from an academic standpoint about forgiveness. And they've seen time after time that forgiveness, even if you hate the idea of forgiving someone, you just look at the science, like look at the evidence of it, that people who forgive have longer lives, better lives, they're happier, they're wealthier, they have better relationships. So forgiveness, as they say, it's for you. And forgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the abuser to die, but in actuality, you're just poisoning yourself. So
And
it's
Carrie,
just,
one of the things that we teach is that when you let go of the story, then the emotion washes away, because there's always an emotion attached to it. What emotion was attached with your father? The predominant emotion that when you forgave, it kind of evaporated.
that's a good question. I would say the first one that comes to mind is probably anger. I felt a lot of anger. And anger causes inflammation. And for people who might be suffering from fibromyalgia, forgiveness is an antidote to fibromyalgia, because fibromyalgia is a grudge disease. I actually spoke to a friend of mine. She's Italian and she has fibromyalgia. And I was like,
I think a lot of Italians do.
We need,
Like,
to
think
I-
it's the
start, we need to
pasta,
start
but it's
looking
not the
into
pasta.
that. Wow. But I mean,
Yeah.
we're laughing, but
Yeah.
think
No, I mean,
about
it's
the
a real thing.
power of the emotions that stay in our body
Yeah.
and are affecting us, and we're not even aware of it. That's
Yeah, I mean, there's another book called The Body Keeps the Score. The book that really helped me with because I was hospitalized for fibromyalgia that was causing intense level, suicide level pain. And I ended up checking myself into a psychiatric unit because I was so suicidal from the fibromyalgia pain. I describe fibromyalgia as if a car drives over my foot, the reason I feel pain is because my nervous system is sending brain signals or signals to my brain about causing the pain. With fibromyalgia, I have the same signals, but there was no car that drove over my foot. What it is it's internal. And quite often unforgiveness will do that. And it will be anger and rage trapped in my body. And so one of the experts who really helped me, his work was named Dr. John Sarno. So here's more homework if you want more tools.
yeah.
If you're dealing with this, read his book. It's called The Mind Body Prescription. He's passed away, but he became trained as a physician, I believe in the 50s, before Western medicine really divorced mind and body, and just turned to pharmaceuticals to pump people full of drugs. And I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. Like I have been on SSRIs for depression before. I think there's a time and a place when there are extreme needs for that, when there is a chemical imbalance. But for fibromyalgia, one of the methodologies that Dr. Sarno talks about is um, go through all the tests, do the MRIs, do the CAT scans, do the CT scans. And if there's no evidence for this level of pain, then chances are it is trapped rage and emotion in your body. And you can be drug free, which is I was at this point before I read his book where I was looking at assisted suicide in Europe because I was like, I can't imagine God would want me to live for another 40 years with this level of pain. And I was on a bunch of different medications, including Ambien to sleep because I was in such pain, and on steroids, and it was just a cocktail of drugs. And through reading his book, I was able to get all of them, and I haven't been on any drugs for years.
So
And I'm
then,
pain.
Well,
so then
congratulations.
you
That's great for
obviously
you.
felt a difference in your body once you forgave. Is that fair?
It is, yeah.
Hmm.
It was actually, yeah, forgiveness was a big part of recovering from fibromyalgia.
Hmm.
I really felt a weight off me.
Yeah.
And, um, you know, what you mentioned earlier, Kelly, about God allowing things and why would he allow it? Well, Jesus himself suffered uh, far more anything than we have, and he took the weight of everything on him. And yet what was one of the last things he did before his death was he forgave them, the people who were doing this torture. He said, Father, forgive them. So I just think that example of our Lord to be able to forgive even in the most intense pain shows a good model for us to follow, and how we're going to be released from pain. And I've definitely seen that in my life.
I'd love to ask you one last question, Carrie. You know, as you were talking about what's been allowed in our lives and a story, and sometimes we go, I wish this wasn't my story, but it is, and I can't change it. But I am curious as you look back from the beginning to now, what are you most proud of what that story caused you to become?
Mm. Yeah, I think the story allowed me, and I agree, Bobby, with what you said, that it's all about the meaning that we assigned us to a story or to an event, or language. I heard an interesting analogy once that if I screamed at you in a foreign language, if I cursed you out in some language you don't speak, it wouldn't really mean anything to you. It would just kind of bounce off because it's a language. So but it's all about the meaning. And
Yeah.
so the extent that we can create a shield over ourselves, and to know that even though I had some subconscious programming that was very unhealthy, and I was screaming at myself internally, and having suicidal urges because of my own screaming, and so I think what I am proud of is someone who has rewritten her subconscious script, and is now being able to share that process and that journey with others so that we can align our lives with the script that God wants for our life and what the Bible says. There's a script that my father, my abuser, put on me and put inside my mind that I chose to keep. And then there's a script that God has for my life. And so I am proud that I have been able to rewrite that script. And I'm really happy that you guys are using your program to help people rewrite their scripts too.
Thank you.
I love that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do too.
Well, I'm proud of you too, Carrie. I mean, you've been through hell and back. I mean, really. Yeah, it's really inspiring to hear your story and really your courage
I think what's
to get out there and tell your story and help
most
people.
inspiring is your honesty and vulnerability, because this is an easy, conversation. And I just want to thank you because, like I said, it's really caused me to go curious about just that self-sabotage. And I think it's prevalent across a lot of women. And I just think this story is so powerful, and it's moved me and it's caused me to get curious. And I just, again, thank you for your story.
Go to carriesheffield.com, get her book, and share her story with the people that you care about. And if you're benefiting, if you're learning and growing, and you're becoming more emotionally free from our show, we thank you for being here, and we thank you for sharing with the people that you love and care about. Help us spread our mission. Again, Kelly and I were on a mission for the last, decade and a half, to help as many people as we can around the globe to learn the science and the power behind making the decision to go ahead and forgive something or somebody. So if you haven't done it, go ahead.
Or themselves.
Or themselves, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our tagline is life is short, just forgive. So if you're waiting, don't wait any longer, just forgive. All right. Carrie, what a pleasure and an honor it was to have you on Time for Forgiveness. Let's just end with, what big idea are you working on right now? I know the book is out. What's the next thing for Carrie Sheffield?
Yeah, so along with the book coming out, I created a nonprofit. We have a fiscal sponsor parent organization called United Charitable. So if you want to look up, it's called Healthy Faith at United Charitable. Would welcome any support of that. It's tax deductible, but through Healthy Faith, as the name suggests, we do events and programming. We did an event in Utah for Suicide Prevention Month. We had an event here in Washington, D.C. at the Museum of the Bible called The Bible and Mental Health. And so we welcome any support to do events. We also do a bunch of book events talking about the book. But the community is around the idea that healthy faith is that balanced faith. It's not religious, traumatic, abusive religion about control or throwing faith out, angry atheism. Healthy faith is really that balance. And we also do a lot of research and programming around mental health and faith, and how one of passion and dream and goal I have is to transform our mental health delivery system, because it is unfortunately lost its way. We have a mental health crisis in our country. We've never had more depression or suicide, even though we've never had more therapists. So something's not right. And unfortunately, 2/3 around there, at least, of therapists are atheist or agnostic, and they don't believe in God, even though vast amounts of research shows strong tie between faith and God, and strong mental health, low addiction, low suicide. And so there's this big disconnect. There's a great researcher at Harvard Medical who is devout Jewish. His name's David Rosemarin. He has shown in his research that 73% of mental health patients say, I would like to have faith and spirituality integrated into my mental health care. And yet 71% of therapists and providers say, I have little to no training in how to do that. And so I am passionate about closing that gap, and letting people know how much mental health is improved through faith and faith community.
Wow, your mission is so important, Carrie. I love it. All right. Well, any other departing thoughts, honey?
No, I'm just, again, so grateful for your story, and I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to have this conversation, and I feel like it won't be our last.
Yeah. So awesome,
Thank you
Carrie.
both.
All right. For Kelly and for Bobby and Time for Forgiveness, thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness.